Greetings, Magic Community. I'm Mike from MTG Scribe, and I want to do something a little different today. The Speed Chess Championship and the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG World Championship, although maybe it's the TCG versus OCG World Championship. I don't fully understand Yu-Gi-Oh! Both of those events happened this weekend, and it got me thinking about Magic event coverage. And to be clear, I don't mean like the backpack streams that Corey Bowmaster does when he goes to events, or even the regional championship. Although I'm interested to see what Star City Games does when it comes back in October for the U.S. Regional Championships. I'm talking about like major event coverage, Pro Tours and Worlds. I wrote an article a while ago, actually about 2 years ago now, for MTG Arena Zone that I'm going to go through in a little bit and talk about what's changed. But the two events that happened this weekend made me interested in, and I sort of went through and watched one game from each of them to get an idea of what coverage looks like, and I want to talk about that just a little bit. So first up, I watched the game one of the Ali Ferrugia and Hikaru Nakamura Speed Chess Championship. I think it was the semifinal game that I watched, and I noticed it was a very polished stream. The games were played digitally on a computer, although they were both players were live and in the same spot, and they were playing in front of a crowd. And the live crowd really added a lot of gravitas to the situation. It felt more exciting because you could hear the crowd reacting. I think that's kind of a neat thing. The casters, Levy Rosman and Daniel Naroditsky, um, actually reminded me a lot of Cedric and Riley from two Pro Tours ago. They had a lot of chemistry together. They were very knowledgeable and very entertaining. I thought that was really good. Chess is obviously a less complicated game than Magic or Yu-Gi-Oh is. So the action was very clear and easy to follow. Now I don't really play chess, although I do watch chess coverage sometimes. Really enjoy watching experts talk about things that they're experts in, even if I don't fully grasp everything that's going on. That's always interesting to me personally. But with the two casters, it was pretty easy to tell what was going on. The real estate of the screen was taken up by useful information, although they kept popping up like individual messages from chat every once in a while. And it was always like banal stuff like, this is exciting, or these players think so fast. And that just seemed pointless. I don't really get the why they're doing that. I guess they want to make the Twitch chat feel included in some way, but it didn't really add anything as a viewer. Um, One thing that I really liked, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but the casters were able to bring up their own version of the board to illustrate complex ideas they're trying to explain to the audience. Like, this is fantastic. The live board is always on screen, but even in the Speed Chess Championships, sometimes the players take a little bit to think through their actions, and the casters are able to bring up and move the pieces on the board while they talk through certain lines that the players might be considering. And I think that is a really nice and useful thing to have. The whole production was very smooth, easy to watch, and it was pretty quick. Uh, the I don't remember if it's Blitz, whatever the 5 minute, maybe it's just speed chess. I'm not totally sure the correct terminology. There are 5 minute time limits for each player, and even with that, it was very easy to watch, very easy to understand what was happening, and I thought it was a really well done, polished product. Now, for the Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championship, I want to get this out of the way first. I have never played Yu-Gi-Oh! I know very little about the game. I've played a lot of card games in the 90s and in the early 2000s. Yu-Gi-Oh! Was never one of them. I never watched the show. I know very little about what is actually happening in these games, but I wasn't watching as someone who's trying to get into the game as a fan or even as a player. I was more interested in the production side of things. So I think they were playing in front of a crowd, but it wasn't totally clear. If they were playing in front of a crowd, the crowd wasn't mic'd up, so I couldn't hear them, which sort of felt like it defeated the purpose of playing in front of a crowd in the first place. It's also possible that they weren't playing in front of a crowd; they never showed them in any meaningful way. I wasn't totally sure. Um, Again, I know very little about this game. They were talking about this being a TCG versus OCG match. Oh, this was Nets versus Ginga was the game that I watched. Again, I don't know anything about any of this, and it's certainly the World Championship is possibly the worst possible uh, first time to watch any new game. So I'm not expecting the casters to explain things to me very much, although it would be nice to get a little bit of clarification on some of the things. There was a lot of pageantry, which I appreciated. The players were on a big stage. There was a lot of production value put into it. That all felt really interesting. This was the first round of 7 for the day. I think they said there's 14 rounds total before they cut to a top 8, I want to say. And this is the featured match that I was watching. So there was a lot of dead air, which makes me think that uh, this is done live and not on a delay like Magic's been doing. That's one thing that I will happily praise Magic coverage for doing is that delay where they actually uh, provide coverage about a round after the live players have played the round. They can cut out so much dead air. There was something like 8 minutes between when the players were first introduced and when they actually started playing the game. Although it did lead to kind of a funny moment where it turns out after both players sat down and shuffled their decks that they were both on the wrong side, so they had to both get up and change and then switch decks. I don't know why that matters, but it was a little bit funny. They played a lot of respect to the table judge, which I really appreciate. Um, the Again, just with the chess championship, the real estate of the screen was very well used. There was a large board. You can clearly see the cards being laid down. Now it's Yu-Gi-Oh! If you've ever seen a Yu-Gi-Oh card, the text can be very small. Obviously, it was impossible to read the cards as they were being laid on the board, and the players were moving them around. But one thing that the casters did have or production at least had the ability to do was if the casters mentioned a card, they could bring up a large picture of the card. Each player had a section of the screen under them dedicated to just this purpose. And I think that was really smart. Um, Even though the text was obviously small on those as well. Again, it is Yu-Gi-Oh! Everyone knows the text can be a little hard to read on those. Just being able to bring them up like that was very helpful as someone who I didn't know what the cards did visually. Even if I did play the game, I have to imagine that this was worthwhile for someone who is only passingly familiar or a casual fan. And it's always good to get those kinds of fans involved. The other thing that I really liked was that there was about the screen real estate. There was like a phase indicator on the top of the screen that showed when they were on their draw phase and their main phase, and very clearly showed the players' life totals and the round timer. That all that was very well presented. The players were mic'd up, which I liked a lot. Um, One interesting thing. This is less about production. Well, no, this is kind of about production actually. The first player, Nets, played a card, let him search his library for another card. So he tutored another card. And then he went to shuffle his deck afterwards, and the judge stopped him and showed him a card, like a little indicator that he put down next to his deck because they didn't need to shuffle their deck until it was time to draw a card again because Yu-Gi-Oh, if you have played the game, you probably know, involves a lot of tutoring effects. So Nets' turn lasted close to. Hold on, I have it written down here somewhere. Uh, Close to 8 minutes, just of player one's first turn. Took about 8 minutes, and he tutored roughly 37 times over the course of that turn. So I don't know who thought up the idea of putting that indicator there, but they deserve a raise. That was such a smart idea. So much time would have been wasted had they not done that and had the players actually had to shuffle in between every single time they tutored. And he never drew a card at any point during his turn. He just tutored through his deck. So I think that was a really smart. I don't know if that's a production decision that they made for this event, if it is just at live events, or what the deal is. The players seem surprised by it, so I don't think it's common, but really, really smart idea on their part. Um, I will say this is less about production. Yu-Gi-Oh is not. I mean, it was like 8 minutes. It was sort of like watching a Nadu turn go off, except that it was turn one, and the way the casters were making it sound seemed like it was just a kind of good turn. And then player two went, and their turn took less than 2 minutes, and most of that was taken up by player one doing things. Again, I don't really understand the game, but the casters seemed very knowledgeable. They seemed to have a really good grasp of the cards and what was going on. That was really well done. The game lasted just under 20 minutes total off the timer, with Nets being the person to take actions during roughly 90% of that. I only watched one game, but I did fast forward to the end of the match because I was curious how it ended. It looks like his opponent, Ginga, was able to win game two. And then during game three, during what seemed like uh, Nets' first turn, the timer ran out, or maybe it was the second turn. The timer ran out, and he won. It seemed because Ginga had slightly less life. I'm not sure if that is actually what decided it or not, but sort of an interesting way to end things. Yeah, overall, I think it was a confusing for me, but good viewing experience. And I think they did a pretty good job overall. Um, would I watch it again? No, but I have no idea what's going on. That has a lot to do with it. But I'm glad that I saw it because it is really interesting to get that perspective on other card games. So, yeah, let's talk about the article that I wrote 2 years ago. So before we get into the article, a little bit about me. I started playing Magic in the mid '90s. I played until roughly 2009, then took a very long hiatus from the game until 2022. When I came back to the game, one of the things that brought me back was the Jim Davis YouTube series, Bronze the Mythic. Um, I hadn't, I didn't know almost anything about Magic in the intervening time, didn't play at all, and just got recommended to me on my YouTube algorithm at one point, and I started watching it, and that's really what got me back into the game. Over time, I joined his Discord, and he was playing in the World Championships in 2022. So members of the Discord wanted to get together and watch the event together. So I ended up watching World Championship 2022, which is the first Magic I had ever watched, first competitive Magic I had ever watched since I watched the. I don't even remember what coverage it was. It was on ESPN2 at like 1:30 a.m. in like 1999 or something. Was the last time I'd watched it, and even as someone who was very invested in the game at that point, I walked away thinking Magic is not cut out for coverage. It just does not work. In my defense, at the time, we had atrociously terrible screen resolution TVs, and you couldn't tell anything. You barely see the pictures of the cards. You certainly couldn't read them. And it was not a pleasant viewing experience, even as I said, someone who was a very invested player in the game. So 2022 comes along, and I watch the World Championships, and it is leaps and bounds better. It's played on Arena, which I thought was really interesting. Mostly that was a COVID thing, I think. This was the first really major live event that had come back, to my understanding. And playing it digitally was certainly an improvement in terms of the viewing experience. So that's all sort of important. What's also important, we'll get to this in a minute, is Magic makes it really difficult to follow a player that you're invested in. At the time, obviously, and even now, Jim is probably my favorite player. Not probably, Jim's my favorite player. And he's someone whose games and whose progress I want to follow during major events. He's played in every Pro Tour since then. He's played in every World Championship since then. He'll be playing again next month at the World Championships in October in Vegas. And Magic makes it very difficult to actually follow his progress. And it's very frustrating to me. That's actually part of the reason that I ended up creating the AMP spreadsheet that I had talked about earlier this year. That's part of the reason that I started tracking the Player of the Year race because it isn't always easy to find information on players that you like, and I think that's a huge, gigantic miss. I think competitive Magic is incredibly fascinating. I really enjoy watching it. I love seeing it played at a high level, and I think that unlike the dumpster fire that is trickle down economics, when it comes to event coverage, if you can do it well at the top, then people will be more interested in watching it at lower levels. And they don't do it super well at the top right now. There's a lot of things they do really well. The casting, I think, has been really, really good. I can't wait to hear Patrick and Cedric. For me, it's going to be the first time I've ever heard them live uh, casting a game or a match or an event, I suppose. I watch the receivables. I think they're wildly entertaining. They obviously have a lot of chemistry together. I've heard Cedric commentate a number of times. Obviously, he's been doing the Pro Tours. I've never heard Patrick do it, but I think that it's going to be really interesting, and I can't wait to see that. But there's a number of things that I think they could do better. So let's go through this article that I wrote for MTG Arena Zone about 2 years ago. Again, just as a reminder, this was written by me after I had seen one event. There's some things in here that I agree with, some things that I disagree with, and we're going to talk about it. And I think some of this stuff they even 2 years later they really should still implement, and they haven't seemed to do that yet. So let's go through. Okay, so I'm going to link this article in the description of this video. Again, it is almost, it's not quite 2 years old. And there are a number of things that I agree with that I said, and there are a number of things that I disagree with. And I have some additional thoughts over the last 2 years. So I have some notes off to my side. So I'm looking over there. That's why. One of the first things I imply on here is that playing on Magic Arena is inherently more viewer friendly than watching it played in paper. And I think that is probably the thing that I, no, it's not the thing I disagree with the most, but I do disagree with it. I actually think that watching uh, paper footage is actually better. I think it's a better viewing experience. I think so long as you do some of the other things that I talk about in here in making it easier for a viewer to follow along with the action, that that's actually probably better, all things considered. And there's a good reason for that, which we will get into in a moment. But I go through um, nine separate options or nine separate suggestions for improving Magic coverage. So let's go through those nine. The first one, spectator mode on Arena. Now, again, I just said that I don't think they should necessarily do these on Arena, but they do play Arena Championships on Arena, and I think that counts as, if not a Pro Tour, something pretty close to it. It is a major event, and the fact that they're still doing that on Discord is awful. It The resolution is never particularly good. The connections are never particularly good. Discord does not make it super easy to stream clearly, and you can't really call this a major event if you're not willing to put something into it. Even the person from Wizards that is in charge of competitive play on Arena has said that he wants a spectator mode. It is wild that this does not exist. Um, I guess Wizards isn't incredibly invested in turning Arena into an esport kind of thing, but I think this needs to be done. And I think there are a number of things you could do, including, as I mentioned here, having a practice board. I mentioned this earlier when we were talking about chess. They have a practice board, and I understand that the game is less complex or less complicated. Complex is probably a bad word. There's fewer variables in chess, obviously, than there are in Magic, and it's probably easier to have something like this. But I do think that if there was some way to digitize the board, even in paper, about what's going on through card readers or something, maybe there's no way to do it reasonably. That's entirely possible. But if there is, I think this is incredibly worthwhile. Give the casters a way to interact with digital objects that represent the cards on the board so that we at home can fully understand the lines the casters are trying to walk us through, the possibilities of things that the players might do. Make it as easy to follow the action as possible. Um, Judges. I think that when you're watching a NFL game, for example, and a judge call happens, what they do is they have a judge on standby or a former judge on standby, referee on standby. They call them in and they ask them to walk through what is the question being asked on the field. What was the penalty? What are the implications of the penalty? Was this a reasonable penalty? You should really be able to do the same thing with Magic coverage by having a judge on standby that the casters can call into the broadcast and say, "Hey, what is this interaction? How does this actually work? What are the nuances of why a player might do this, and what does that mean for the game going forward?" Uh, the casters aren't judges. They can't know every interaction that's going to happen. Or, I mean, Magic is a super complicated game. It is as complex a game as is possible to exist, as far as we know. There are a million rules, interactions that are non intuitive. Having someone on standby that could walk the audience and the commentators through that would be a huge benefit. And I think of all of my suggestions, this one is probably the one that's easiest to implement. It would cost some money, obviously. They'd have to pay someone to do it, but I think the benefit would far outweigh the cost on their end. I mentioned here that they should have a whole cam. They kind of do this with paper cover. I mean, they have hand spotters in some of it. Blake the Blake, the host of a weekly MTG, was a hand spotter at a few events ago. Fire Shoes does it sometimes. Sometimes he's a table judge or table friend. Uh, and they add a lot. No, the audience having as much information as possible is a good thing. I should be able to see what is in both players' hands. I think an easy way to do this would be to do something like I say here with the whole cam. If you don't know what a whole cam is, when they do poker coverage now, at some point someone had the idea to put a little camera in the table. So when the players got their cards, they briefly paused them over the camera before moving them off and looking at them and doing what they needed to do. You could do the same thing with Magic. Every time someone draws a card, just slide it over the camera for half a second, then pick it up. That way, the audience always knows exactly what is going on and exactly what is in the hand and what has been drawn. And so do the commentators. And that means that they have more information and they're more able to accurately predict what's going to be happening and walk the audience through it. Again, audience engagement is really important. I think this would cost them a reasonable amount of money to implement. I obviously coverage is pretty expensive, but I think it's worthwhile. I think the additional information would make the games easier to watch and more engaging overall. Card images, we talked about this with the Yu-Gi-Oh coverage. Um, they had two dedicated spots on screen underneath the players' pictures where the production team could call up images of cards to show exactly what that card does. I think they have gotten a lot better with this, to be totally honest, with Magic coverage. I don't know that they do this quite as much as I would like, but they have been doing this more. When I wrote this, they didn't do it at all. Or if they did, it was extremely rare. So I think they've done a better job with this, but I still think there's some improvement to be had here. Um, Regular coverage, I just ask for more coverage. That is a thing that has been improving. I think this is probably the thing that they have done the best with in the time since I wrote this. Again, we have the regional championship coming up. That's going to be covered. Arena championship is covered. The pro tours are covered. We get some stuff from smaller events on Twitch. I wish Magic was better. I wish Wizards was better about letting people know what events are covered and which ones aren't covered and where to find them. I do think there's an information problem and a sort of a problem with how they present their scheduling. One of the reasons that I have my event calendar on my website. because the official arena event calendar is just not updated often enough. And uh, right now, if you go to it, it'll have 4 events on it, even though there are midweek Magic events coming up. There are flashback drafts coming up. None of those are currently on there. It is just the 4 major things because we reached the end of what was put on the calendar once every 30 to 60 days or so. It's updated. And once we reach the end of it, it's not updated again until I don't know. I don't know what the inciting incident is to get it updated. But the information is out there. It's on arena announcements. I have it. It's on my event calendar on MTG Scribe. I don't really understand it. And one of the things they could really do is they could better use that calendar to let people know when events are happening and when they're going to be covered, because generating interest in competitive play is good for everybody. Um, Game footage is a thing that they've gotten better at releasing. They do release a lot of the uh, events. For Pro Tour, for example, they release all of the featured matches and a good amount of the backup matches. I wish they would release slightly more of this. And actually, this is a criticism I'm going to levy at the Magic community, not just at Wizards. I think more people should do reactions to these events. I think more players should make a YouTube video where they're watching a match and they're really dissecting the strategy in a way that the commentators can't. Even if the commentators are skilled competitive Magic players, because it's happening live, they don't have the luxury of going back and rewatching certain things that you would have if you're reacting to it on YouTube. And I wish more people would do that. I think game analysis is a really under appreciated aspect of the Magic community, and I really wish we could have some more of that. We want a larger, smarter audience as much as possible. A little hidden thing that I ask for here is 17 lands. If you have 17 lands, if you don't know this, if you signed up for 17 lands and you have the tracker on your computer, they track every game you play, not just limited ones. You can go into your 17 lands account and you can view a practice board that looks just like this. And you can go step by step through your entire game, action by action, and replay it. This is true for every game you play. Only the limited ones are saved, so you can watch those back from farther, longer ago. I believe it's the last 50 games total that are by default are on there. But then limited, it's saved for much longer than that. I think this is the most underutilized tool for getting better at Magic. It's the 17 lands replay board. Being able to go back through your games step by step, action by action. I would love to see someone take submissions for this and do a YouTube show, Twitch show, something where they go through viewers' games and talk through the strategies and talk about, oh, you did this here. Maybe you should have done this instead. I don't think I'm the right person to do that. I am not a competitive player for the most part. I play a little bit. I think that I'm pretty good at this game. I by no means an expert, but I think someone could really be a huge benefit to the community by doing this. And I wish someone would take that and run with it. Then we come to the better Magic clock. Now, this is the thing that I ask for that I think I am most wrong about. I actually think this would be bad overall. I sort of wanted something like a chess clock so that the games could sort of fly by. I think this is actually a terrible idea. I very much disagree with me here. I think a better solution is the one they came up with, which is they have a delay from when the games are live played versus when they show them on coverage of about an hour. And that does the same job that the chess clock would do, where they can truncate things, they can speed up slow portions of the game. It's just a better version of what I'm asking for here. I think this is a terrible idea. I don't think they should have a magic clock. I think they did a great job. Huge praise for the production team for solving this issue that in a much better way than I did. Live pairing standings and results. Okay, so I mentioned that I was really frustrated when I was watching Worlds 2022 because I had a hard time finding information about how Jim Davis was doing. Part of his Discord, everyone was really interested in how he was doing, and he was not on coverage very much. For the record, he finished fifth in that event. On tiebreakers. He only missed out on the top four. If you remember, the Worlds 2022 only cut to a top four instead of a top eight. He missed out on the top four on tiebreakers to Nathan Stoyer, who won the entire event. So he did really well in that event, obviously. But it was still, despite the fact that he was right there in the mix and almost made the cut to top four, it was almost impossible to find out information about how his matches were going. He was almost, I think he was on coverage for two matches total, and at least one of those was a backup. Um, Maybe it was three. But still, it was, as a viewer, as someone who had a favorite Magic player and was very invested in how they were doing, was totally unacceptable. And I don't think they've gotten much better at this in the last 2 years. Because of that event, someone showed me MTG Melee, which is the tournament software they're using for Worlds, the tournament software they continue to use. And I started going on there and posting round by round results for Jim. And then eventually, over the course of the next few Pro Tours, other players that people had asked me to search for. I did it for the last year's limited 75K, the one that Jason Yee won. And that's how it qualified for the Pro Tour. And it's been crushing the Pro Tour this year. But players or fans who wanted to know how Jason was doing, they couldn't unless they knew specifically to go to MTG Melee and specifically how to navigate the Melee site, which is not the most intuitive site in the world because that's not what it was created for. It is a tournament organization software. It is not for someone to go and look up standings on who isn't in the tournament. That's just not the design. That's not who they cater to. And I think Wizards needs to do a much better job of this. That the whole reason that MTG Scribe exists, to be totally honest, is because I was doing this for various tournaments, and I sort of expanded out of Jim Davis's Discord to the Lords of Limited Discord, Limited Level Up Discord, Mystical Disputes Discord. People were hungry for this kind of information, and now, while I do praise the production team for that delay that I was talking about earlier, that hour-long delay between when coverage happens and when the live event actually happens, or the live results actually come in, one big negative of that is that it is impossible to find standings and deck information right now without spoiling the broadcast. And I think that is pretty unacceptable. I am going to do my best once we get to Worlds this year to provide spoiler free coverage. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take every round that Melee posts results. I'm going to post it in a spreadsheet, and I post that spreadsheet on my website. So if you want to just enjoy the coverage, it will never be updated until coverage has made it clear they are done with a round. So if you have a favorite player and you want to see how they're doing, you're going to be able to do that on MTG Scribe. I shouldn't be doing that, truthfully. There should be a native way or a website that Wizards has. It's not magic.gg because that is not updated anything remotely to real time, even on the delay. It just isn't a priority for them, and I think that's horrible. So I'm going to do everything I can to make it as easy as possible for people to follow their favorite players, follow the Player of the Year standings. We have what 5 players that are eligible for Player of the Year this going into Worlds this year, and they're going to talk about it during the broadcast. But people should people who are interested in finding that information should be able to find that information. I have to manually track all of that. And it leads to situations where going into the last round of the most recent Pro Tour, I had a player who was in the event DM me. They did not follow me on Twitter. They DM'd me on Twitter and said, "Hey, I am trying to figure out if I am able to qualify for Worlds based on adjusted match points, and I have no way of doing that. Someone told me you're the person to ask about that. They were at the event, and I was the person to ask about that. That seems crazy to me. Now I was able to help this person out, and they weren't the only person to contact me. By the way, uh, there was other people as well. So I don't know what the answer is here. I don't know if they need to hire someone to do this. I don't know if they need to reorganize in a way that makes this coverage something that you could do on magic.gg in more real time. I'm not sure. In the meantime, I'm going to do my absolute best to help people follow and enjoy competitive Magic at major events without being spoiled. I don't know what else to say. I really wish they did a better job with this, and they don't. So I'm going to do everything I can. Now that's the article. I do have a few ancillary thoughts that have come up in the years since. I've touched on a couple of these, but I have about 5 things that I think that they could improve that are not mentioned in this article. First one, I do want to say I think that paper coverage overall has improved dramatically since I wrote that article. I think it is a lot easier to follow, and I genuinely prefer watching paper coverage to arena coverage. However, part of the reason for that is, as I mentioned, watching competitive events on arena is kind of a huge dumpster fire because there is no spectator mode. There is no way to naturally watch these events. They have to do it through Discord, and it's just not a pleasant viewing experience for anyone. Uh, so I really, and I also don't understand. So they do a draft. The way that again, Arena Championships is like a mini Pro Tour, fewer rounds, fewer players. Although that is changing. The next one that's coming up, there's supposed to be a whole new structure for that they have not announced yet, which I'm pretty eagerly awaiting to see how they do that. But the way that it had been up through the most recent Arena Championship, the first 3 rounds were draft rounds, and that was the entire draft for the event. One thing that that I like is that they did release all the limited decks from the last Arena Championship. That was very nice of them. Love looking at those. I don't understand why they don't have a way to release the entire draft logs. It's another thing I know. I can't say I know for a fact. I am 99% sure that there are limited podcasters who would absolutely love to be able to go. No, you know what? I can say this for a fact. There are limited podcasters who would love nothing more than to have a full draft log from a player that was at the Arena Championships that they can go through and dissect on their show. It would be great content. It would help players get better. It would help the podcasters discuss Magic, competitive Magic on a level they can't currently because they don't have the draft logs. All they can do is watch the footage, and it's just not as good. And only for the players that they covered on actual coverage, they have all the logs. That's what 17 Lands does. If 17 Lands can do it, Arena can do it, which means they have logs for literally every single player. And it should be public. There's no reason for it to not be public. If the player on coverage is public, why wouldn't all the other players be public? There's no reason not to release that information. There's no reason to deny people who actively want to engage with your product to engage with your product on that level. This seems like a no-brainer to me, and I genuinely do not understand why they don't do this. Um, Speaking of draft, I think one thing they should really improve is when they're doing draft rounds at the Pro Tour or at Arena Championships, they should have a draft expert on commentary. They did this a little bit a couple of Pro Tours ago. They had Ethan Sachs there for day 2 draft coverage, not in the booth while the draft was going on, but uh, at the desk talking about it beforehand. And it added so much to the overall understanding of people who aren't limited players watching this format be drafted. Uh, This should be in every event thing. They do 2 different 6 total draft rounds at every Pro Tour. I don't know what they're gonna do for the Arena Championship. I sort of suspect, although I have no way to know this for sure, that they're gonna essentially turn it into just another Pro Tour, and it's gonna be run basically the same way. And if they do that, there'll be 6 rounds of draft there as well. I think that would be a great idea. I think they should do this. And if they're going to do, but regardless, for Pro Tours and the World Championships at least, they should have a draft expert in the booth. Draft is a very nuanced subject, and I think that it again it just adds a lot to the audience's understanding of what's going on if there's someone who can walk through those lines in a way that current Magic commentary can't really do. We talked about knowledge of when events are happening. Uh, I don't know. I don't know. This is a thing that should be easy to do. They spend so it seems like they spend so little resources on advertising, even major events, even Pro Tours. They have gotten slightly better with Pro Tours and the World Championships recently, and even Arena Championships to a slightly lesser degree, but still not enough that not enough. It's not enough. They need to do more. They need to do more with this. Um, I also just think that when it comes to audience engagement for these events, they should do more with arena tie-ins when it comes to major events. Like the midweek magic after a pro tour should involve the top 8 decks from the event whenever possible. Th- to be fair, they did do something like this a few months ago after the last pro tour. No, not after the last pro tour. It was the pro tour before. It was the last standard pro tour. Because I remember people being surprised that the Slowgurk deck was not represented, but they took a number of the meta decks from that Pro Tour and made them made it a Phantom event where you could pick your favorite deck and you could play it. That's fantastic. They should do this every single time there's a Pro Tour. After the Pro Tour, players want nothing more than to play their favorite decks. And even if it's just for 3 days, letting players experience what it's like to play these top meta decks in a similar environment. One of the problems with playing Pro Tour deck on the ladder is that the meta of the ladder is different from the meta at a Pro Tour. But if it's within an environment where you have the top 8 decks and maybe the top 10 most played decks to select from, you're playing within that same meta that the Pro Tour was played in. And it lets the audience engage in that competitive environment in a way they couldn't otherwise. Um, this feels like a thing that shouldn't be too difficult to do, especially if it's standard. It's going to be difficult if it's modern, obviously, or Pioneer at the moment, although uh, pretty soon Explorer and Pioneer are going to be the same, functionally the same. So they should be able to do it with both standard and Pioneer next year. And again, this should be sort of a no brainer. I think it shouldn't be very difficult for them to do. Um, and it would anything you can do to engage your audience more is great. Is great for everybody. Like I said, I do think that if you make Pro Tours and the World Championship as fun and engaging an event to watch as possible, then lesser tournaments like the regional championship, lesser tournaments like sometimes RCQs are streamed on Twitch. People will actively seek those out, and it's going to make all of Magic just a better place to be. The more people are watching these events, it's good for the health of both competitive and casual play. And I think there's a number of things they should do. Just talked about. Um, Yeah, and that those are my 2 years later thoughts. So this video is a lot longer than I thought it was going to be. I sort of expected 15 to 20 minutes, but as it turns out, I had a lot to say. Probably rambled a little bit in there, but I'm very passionate about this. I think competitive Magic is. I said this in my article. I still believe this is true. Poker had a boom where it was insanely popular. Chess right now is going through a similar thing on a slower timeline. It's taking a little it's ramping up slower, but I think it's gonna have more staying power. Poker isn't anywhere near the force that it used to be, but chess keeps ramping up. And I, having played professional for about 2 years, in 2010 to 2012 or so, I made my living playing illegal poker games in Connecticut. I played a lot of poker. I was very invested in poker. I have played chess. I don't play a ton of chess, although I do, as I mentioned earlier, enjoy watching chess content. So as fans of both of those games, fans of competitive versions of both of those games, as someone who consumes content for both of those games, I think Magic has every tool and everything it needs to be bigger than either of them. But I think there's a lot of little things that need to change. And again, something I'm very passionate about. The whole reason MTG Scribe exists, the whole reason this YouTube channel exists, is because I didn't think Magic coverage was good enough. And that's the main reason I started doing this. And then it turns out other things aren't quite as good. Again, MTG Scribe is a centralized location to find information, news, and when events are happening, the calendar is on there. It's just a centralized location where you can find all that stuff because that didn't exist, and that seems bananas to me. That is not that I'm the first person to do that in a simplified way. Um, Clearly, very passionate about it, and I want you to enjoy. I want you to be able to consume content that people want to consume. And I really wish Wizards was doing a better job of that. I think they've improved a lot in a number of ways. A long way to go, and I hope that they get there because I love Magic. It's my favorite game of all time, any medium, end of sentence. So, um, until next time, good luck. I hope tomorrow's a better day for you.